Hello, my customer success friends. Irid Izip's here for CSM Practice, the customer success consulting firm. Today, we're going to talk about how to improve user adoption. And I have Henrik de Gyor. He's a remote consultant and is specifically specializes in assisting and advising advocates for his client. Henrik, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, and welcome to the channel?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I live in South Carolina. I'm a consultant by trade. I specialize in digital asset management, and I'm also a podcaster and a writer.
You have produced a book recently, actually a number of books from what I've seen.
Yes, I've written 7 books in about 3 years. They're all on Amazon, and one of them is actually called Improving User Adoption, which is probably what we're going to talk about today.
Why did you write the User Adoption Podcast book, and why did you name it that way?
So user adoption, interestingly enough, is a subject of many different kind of businesses. So user adoption by definition is users adopting a product or service, right? Any product or service, whether it's software, hardware, food, cars, you name it, whether it's expensive or not, impulse buy or not. Some people consider it, some people think about it, some people give it a lot of thought, and others don't. And I wanted to understand, how does it change depending on the product or service that you're offering? And what can we learn from others? I first started actually with a podcast idea because I have 8 different podcast series that you can find on henrikdegyor.com. You can find the books there too. But I first started with a podcast where I interviewed all the people I could find who would be interested in being interviewed about user adoption specifically. Like, how do you get user adoption in your business, for your clients, for your, whether it's brick and mortar, online store, whatever, doesn't matter. And understand, like, well, how does it differ from a restaurant or a software company or a massive organization or a tiny company of one? And understand, how is it done, and how is it done successfully, more importantly, and boil that down and understand those snippets. So I aimed for about 50 some interviews. So that would be like 1 per week as far as podcast release. I transcribed them all and took all the snippets because I asked boilerplate questions that were basically like very easily taken out into pointers or tips, where I specifically asked, like, what are the successes and challenges that you face with user adoption? What are an advice you have for people who are trying to improve user adoption? And I would get vastly different results, vastly different answers, regardless of who I was asking, even if it was in the same sector. Whether I was asking people who authored books about it, whether it was somebody who knew customer success management forwards and backwards. I've interviewed you for it as well, and try to understand, what do they have in common and what nuggets of gold can we get out of that so that we can improve it for our own businesses. So it was basically a learning exercise to, like, I don't pretend to be a user adoption expert, but I want to learn from the best. So I find the best worldwide, interview them, and put them in the book.
Before we continue, don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel and smash that notification button so that you don't miss out on any new videos. Essentially, if somebody wants to consume those answers, they can either listen to the podcast, or if they're more like people who prefer to read about it and highlight certain answers, they can have the transcriptions of those interviews sort of like compiled and edited a little bit in those books, actually giving them all these interviews in one spot. They can read it at night.
Exactly. And
That's
understand
really
all the
cool.
different perspectives. So it's a collection of perspectives specifically around user adoption across a lot of different businesses, everything from huge companies like Microsoft all the way to companies of one. So I found out that Microsoft has 100 people that are working on user adoption internally.
Wow.
That's huge. And then there's people that don't know what it is. I tried to interview some people, interestingly enough, who wrote books around UX, user experience. It was like, oh, there should be alignment. So some authors found that alignment, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll definitely do an interview with you with this.
This is great. Like, so many things that you get in the process of just researching a topic. What were some of the aha moments that you might have, like, oh, this is an interesting answer? Can you highlight like a couple of those for our audience that might be intrigued to know, what did you learn from it?
The variety is all over the place of different ways that you can attract people back to your product or service. I interviewed chefs that come to your house, for example. Well, how do you get people to adopt that service and ask you back? They write thank you letters. They handwrite thank you letters. That's one way to do it, right? So there's the things that don't scale well. And then there's things like using video thank yous or video personalized messages to people when they do something for you, and you just add their name verbally. And there's a pre-recorded message of you saying something with either an avatar of yourself or someone else, or a recording of yourself, and you just add their new name. So you just add a list of names, and then they add you in there. So there's a different strategies to personalize it, to attract people and go, wow, that was special. Wow, they actually treated me like more than just a customer. I really want to use this service, or I need to use this service more often because I'm not just treated like a number.
I would say that that's even important when we talk about customers of software companies. Because when we validate or assess which software company you want to work with, a lot of times it's like, are we going to be like one of many customers? Are we going to be a significantly strategic customer for them? Because people actually really enjoy that special treatment, to feel like they are an important customer. So I really appreciate that personalization. Was there like things that came up multiple times for services companies that didn't for software companies? Or vice versa?
For software companies, typically there's a support level needed, a baseline support level needed to like, oh, well, I'm not sure on how to do X, right? Or can I do Y feature or Y process in this software? And how do I do that? Or how do I do this in my accounts? When I interviewed Slack, for example, they had a whole bunch of tips of how they were successful. How not only did they gain more customers and how they literally texted every single person, because a text is more open than email, to get people to download the software, especially if it's a freemium software. But also once they're using the system, free or otherwise, it's like give them a level of service to help them continue to use it properly or successfully, more importantly, to enhance the customer success, which is kind of important, with that level of customer experience that they should have. Let's say there's requirements and then there's expectations. There's that sweet spot of, well, how much is necessary and how much time and effort do I need to put into it? Which is, there's usually a gap there, because some people's expectations are sky high and some are just at the requirements level. So they vary significantly, and it varies on the kind of user, the avatar, if you will. So we talked about journey mapping with some people. We talked about understanding the different user stories and scenarios and why they would use product X or service Y.
Really interesting. I'm very curious about the product-led type solutions like Slack, where you can't really rely on a human-led touch. You absolutely have to rely on the product experience. Did they emphasize UX, guided tours within the product? What was like some of the things that you remember that they said that really made the product sticky?
There was a lot of those things. They have a lot of those enhancements that they've added over time. And it's a matter of understanding what the customer needs, what the user needs, even if they're not a customer yet, because there's a freemium version. So I may not be a customer, but I may be a user. Hence why you might be a user first, and then you become a customer with a freemium product.
What did they do? Did they interview a lot of customers in the initial days? How did they figure out what do customers need and then adjust the UX based on that, or just build on more features?
Well, a little bit of both, realistically speaking.
Who would you say should definitely listen to your podcast? Is it people working in product? What kind of teams, what kind of functions do you think will majorly benefit from this podcast?
Well, I've interviewed a lot of people that are in the CSM function, the customer success management function of within their businesses. If a company doesn't, whether a product or services is, it doesn't really matter, in my opinion. What matters is people wanting to improve their user adoption. And that's literally the title of the book, Improving User Adoption. It's basically the hidden success behind businesses is you getting more users to adopt your product or service. Because if they don't, and they use it once and they run away, kind of like an app download, if you downloaded plenty of apps that we've probably opened once and never came back to, that's not a very high user adoption rate. And I did interview some app developers about that too. The primary audience, in my opinion, would be people who want to improve user adoption, regardless of level they're in their company, regardless of their company of one or several 100,000. If they're interested in the process of doing that, this is culmination. And this is why I researched creating this book. I was looking for a niche about a topic that didn't have enough of a voice, enough information out there about it. Even before I found out about customer success, I looked up user adoption.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's considered like a stepchild of customer success, because I interviewed some people who didn't like the word user because they are humans, they are people, let's be honest. They're not just users with a number. They're individual people who potentially may continue to use your product or service. And if you want them to do that, why not learn from the people who've already figured it out?
Totally. If anybody wants to hear how different thought leaders in this space, people who work in this space, that their job is to increase user adoption, it's going to be in your podcast. So if you go on a walk every day, just want to pop one up and just listen to an interview, I think it's super interesting to just hear what everybody's saying and then start to kind of think through what are the repeating themes that I'm hearing, and can I borrow from a completely different industry, like from, some chef, can I get that customer experience and incorporate it even in a software industry? I think it's really, really cool. Should be a very exciting and inspiring experience listening to your podcast. So thank you so much, Henrik, for joining me today and sharing about your podcast. Yet another resource for us customer success fanatics. Links are going to be shared below. Leave some comments for Henrik below. Subscribe to his podcast. And thank you so much. Best of luck with adopting mechanisms and methodologies. Hopefully you get some insights from today's session. I'll see you at the next video.